Greetings again, folks, and welcome to week 2 of World Regional Geography. Time certainly flies. It's still summer, but before you know it, we'll be playing Christmas music. We made it through the typical cycle of one of my weeks here, and hopefully we can begin locking into a rhythm here of the way I go about things. The world is getting complicated. Have you ever tried getting a kitchen trash bag open? Next to impossible to figure most of those things out. Recently, my wife brought some home, and they just happened to open right up. I was able to see where they opened, and I was so overjoyed. It should not be that difficult. And we experience it online too. In order to get to certain places on a page, the average LMS has uh, veritable mazes. Dashboards today in cars look like the bridge of something that would be on Star Trek. One needs pretty much a crash course from the dealer to figure out where things are. So many of us sarcastically respond, it doesn't have to, be that complicated. The same principle could be applied to our immigration problem. Why do folks flood to the West? Is it because folks are leaving good economies and desire great ones? Uh, no. Well, the latter may be true to an extent, but the countries that folks are leaving are basically economic and political toilets. Now, how much pressure is put on these countries to get their act together so they're not pushing people out of their countries? But like, the kitchen trash bags, the dashboards of cars, LMSs, that would just make too much sense, right? To ask something like that of our political leaders. And in this chapter, we're going to see among several concepts some of the structural issues that make for political and economic stable countries. So in this particular chapter here, what we want to do, my objectives, are to recognize key components of population. We want to discover elements of economic geography and relate the various cultural practices that shape the world's cultural mosaic. Some of the and have your textbooks open too. Be sure to have your textbooks open for some nearby, especially for you visual types. Excuse me, for some important visuals. And I have sent you some graphic organizers for comprehension exercises too. And again, after each concept, and you can see them laid out in your lecture model, cross-referencing it with the graphic organizer they sent you. If you wanted to stop it at that juncture, go back over your notes and fill in the graphic organizer and continue to break the lecture up, you're certainly welcome to do that. And that would work for me probably if I was in your shoes. But yeah, you can work that out. Some of the heads up terms that I want to alert you to that you probably haven't heard before. There's probably a lot of them here haven't heard of before and certainly do not know what they mean. And instead of just launching that on you in the lecture, this could tip you off and help you understand what I'm talking about as I'm going about it here in real time. Human development, talking about human development, and you can see these terms on your lecture model too. This is the process of enhancing human development. Birth rate, we're talking about birth rate, the number of live births per 1,000 inhabitants in a given year. Class. This is imposed stratifications of a society. Demography is the study of population. Population, the way we're going to be looking at it here is to per unit of cultivable land. Not so much per square mile, the conventional way we look at it, but people per use of land that you can actually use. Demographic transition. A demographic transition, I'll have a visual for this that you can look at in your textbooks if you desire. These are stages of birth and death rates. Age sex diagrams, or otherwise known as population pyramids. Again, visual, there'll be some visuals for this too. These are compositions of a nation's population. A nation and a country. There's a difference between a nation and a country. We will look at that. A nation is pretty much the ethnic makeup, the cultural makeup. The country would be entailed, or the political boundaries. NGOs. I'm going to talk about NGOs several times today. NGOs are non-governmental organizations. They're private and they're voluntary organizations. They're not governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations. Multinational corporations, we'll talk about those in connection with NGOs a couple or three times as well. These are international service jobs. Economic geography, the impact of people and their decisions on resource usage, the distribution of them, hence production of wealth or poverty in a country, decisions that are made. Tertiary production, we'll break that down obviously as we roll all of these. Tertiary production would be maybe a $64 way of saying service industries. Universal and global religions, universal/global religions. These are religions that are open to anyone. You do not have to belong to a tribe, right, or an ethnicity. Structural adjustment, the production of export goods. You do that through reducing tariffs, privatizing, get away from being government run, cutting government corruption, balancing budgets, okay? And then last kind of heads up terms here, formal and informal economies. Formal economies, what we have, you have a job and taxes are monitored, taxes are taken out of your checks, and informal economies, that type of thing isn't monitored because a lot of people are living in squalor, and they're doing anything they can to survive, and salaries and stuff like that is not not factored into. So an informal economy. And there we go. Chapter 2, Concepts in World Geography. Here we go. Inhabitable space. And I'm just setting this up, right? And I'll tip you off to when it's time to do some writing. Inhabitable space. Inhabitable space occupies, really, if you think about it, take a look at any globe. A small percentage of the Earth's total surface area and population densities. And the way we look at population density is the number of people per given area, i.e., per square miles, are highest in fertile lowland areas, especially along coasts. So while the overall population of the world is split evenly between settlements in rural and urban areas, poorer countries have a greater percentage of their population living in rural areas. Useful measures of population change include crude, crude because they don't account for things like age and gender, birth and death rates, the demographic transition, infant mortality, and population doubling time. A doubling of population occurs in 35 years compared to the average 70 years. Poor countries where they're, having more children, population will double in 35 years. So in our world of increases, global interconnection, migration, as we know, has played an important role in understanding population trends as immigration buoys population growth in countries with slow rates of, understanding population trends and national increase. So sheer population size is not necessarily an effective indicator of resource consumption, as wealthy countries like the United States consume, uh, you know, more amounts of resources than other countries, probably most of the world. And a lot of this has to do with standards of living, which has to do with decisions made by governments and people, right? So let's break this down here. Population, the first section I want to delve into here, and you guys have some fill in the blanks right there. Population, first blank there, population per unit of cultivable land. So population resource ratio is resources to population. And as I alluded to a few minutes ago, 29% of the earth is land, right? And not much of that is inhabitable. Okay, we don't stop and think about that. And over the next 50 years, think about this, over the next 50 years, 90% of the world's growth will be in densely populated and poor countries. Half of the world's population is connected in urban areas, right? And 35% of that is in India and China. Demography is the study of population structure and change. So birth rates. Talk about birth rates or the number of live births per 1,000 inhabitants per year in a given population. Your infant mortality, these are deaths per 1,000 births in the first year of life. Your demographic transition, this is a theoretical model of stages that show changes over time based on the experience of Western countries. So the model of stages relates birth and death rates to social and economic circumstances. For a visual of this, you can turn to page 48 in our textbooks, and you can see a graphic of those particular stages. Stage 1, high birth rate and death rates, and you're talking about a pre-industrial society. Stage 2 would be death rates that are falling, birth rates are still high, an industrial society, and rapid population increase. Stage 3, rapid population increase giving way to lower birth rates in developed and developed industrial societies. And frankly, I think this is probably where most of the world is today. Then you have stage 4, low birth rates and death rates, and slow population growth, and that's where most of the Western world is. Most of the Western world is today. Migration. Migration is the long-term movement of people into or out of a place. I think in your notes, I think I still have my 2002 date there, but 2015, the latest data on this. 2015, there were 244 million people who lived outside of the country of their birth. Sounds like a lot. It is, but it's 3.3% of the world's population. So, some white space there and some notes. The composition and history of a country's population is often summarized in an age-sex diagram, or otherwise known as population pyramids. And a nice visual over on page 49, just a page over from the demographic transition models there. You can see the age-sex diagrams. And the first one there is Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea gives you 3 years to look at, 1988, 2010, and some projections for 2025. And it gives you a scale there of ages, from 0 to 4 in 1988, how many births there were. 2010, how many births there were. Children living from ages 0 to 4, and projections for 2025. And then at the bottom, you can see the scale for the United States. So you can look at that on your own, and very interesting population pyramids. Population pyramids give governments a window on, population projections for the future. Now, the British economist Thomas Malthus. I forgot to mention him with the heads up terms. Thomas Malthus, a English demographer, economist. I think Thomas was a reverend as well. He predicted in the late 1790s, 1798 to be exact. He wrote a treatise, and he spoke in that treatise about how population, his prediction would be that it's going to outpace food growth, all right, food production. Now, we know that he was wrong. 1798, Malthus just didn't take into account. He didn't foresee modern technology, but I guess we can forgive him for that in 1798 when he wrote this treatise. We'll move now into governments and political movements. And if you wanted to stop and fill out your population section of the graphic organizer, that's an idea. I'm going to move on here in governments and political movements and set this up before we start writing notes and the fills. An important element in understanding political geography is the role of governments and political movements and their influence on both human and physical geography. And I'm really emphasizing that because it goes back to the top of what I said today. Not a small amount of the world's problems that are forcing people to leave rats and risk life and limb to get to the United States, and risk breaking laws getting here, has a lot to do with what we call push factors. Push factors are factors in a home country that are causing people to leave, and oftentimes this gets forgotten. And what in your paper will, depending on what countries you guys are going to be choosing, will highlight this. But while self-governing countries are the basic units of global political action or interaction, nationalism and non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and NGOs it's any group of people involved in some kind of collective action that's not for profit, non-violent, and apart from any government. Red Cross would be one of those, right? Red Cross, an example of that. Doctors Without Borders, okay? And nationalism and non-governmental organization are both significant forces, right, driving such interaction. Since since the 1990s, global political diversions and divisions, previously shaped by Cold War alliances between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, have given way to regional groupings of countries. Now let's break this down and look at some of your fill in the blanks and notes here. A country, and basically the things I want you to know for the quiz, a country is rarely, if ever, the same as a nation. In fact, that looks like a good quiz question. I've been teaching this course since 2007, and I'm thinking that is a quiz question. I'm thinking it is a quiz question. So, in light of that, a nation is an imagined country. It's an imagined country or a politicized ethnic group where folk believe themselves to share some common cultural features linked to a specific area of land. Nationalism is a desire of a nation to have its own self-governing country. Multinational multinational corporations, uh, they move services and jobs abroad. 40% 40% of the jobs are service jobs that they move, such as tourism, data processing, banking, insurance, not necessarily manufacturing jobs, right? Maybe the obvious thing you would think of. NGOs, there we go again, your non government organizations. These are private, voluntary organizations. Um, Again, non commercial activity. Red Cross, I had mentioned, Doctors Without Borders, Greenpeace. I've been thinking about this. More entities are popping into my head. Then you have country groupings for trade or defense. Some examples of that would be GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. NAFTA was in the news a lot last few years. The North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. I think it was written in 1993, enacted in 1994 during the Bill Clinton administration, and it had been under assault by President Trump, and it has hence undergone several revisions. NATO also has been a punching bag of President Trump's. May still be, from what I've been reading. That was the North American Treaty Organization, designed during the Cold War to the military alliance between the democracies to protect Western Europe from any kind of Soviet invasion. The argument here from President Trump is that the lion's share, at least, of those costs have been they're being paid for by American taxpayers, and Trump's looking at wealthy economies like Germany, who pay next to nothing, and saying, I think it's time that the European countries start paying for their own security. And not to digress too much, I think he is probably thinking that it's maybe time for the U.S. maybe to I don't know about bailing out on it, but the Cold War's long been over, and I think you get the picture. We have the World Trade Organization too. World Trade Organization again has been under assault by President Trump. And I'm not saying this in defense or support of President Trump. So, for lack of better ways of saying it, I hope I'm not sounding irreverent. The World Trade Organization was designed to prevent discrimination between trading partners, right? And the president has looked into some of the trade deals over the past several decades and has found, in his opinion, that they have not been favorable to the United States. Just a kind of a side note, and I was telling some of you guys this, I wrote this to some of you in connection with some of the lessons in chapter 1. Now, I haven't really looked at China, the trade deal with China, the trade deals there, but I did look at our trade deals with German cars, American cars, and it looked like the Germans were getting a very favorable, in my opinion, from what I could interpret, um, good trade deals. And I did think, who put this together? And I could see what the president was talking about. I'm going to now make a transition into economic geography, and with a little setup here. Given the large number of people throughout the world, there are very few extremely wealthy persons, and roughly 1/3 of the world's countries, accounting for 20% of the total population, control nearly 2/3 of the world's wealth, as measured by, and we're going to take a look at some of these indexes, the PPP, which is the Purchasing Power Parity Economic Index, and Gross National Income, which you may have heard of, the GNI. So, but there was a continuing trend toward free market capitalism. I think that's still the case in hopefully the global South and global East. Individual decision making, we talk about free market capitalism, individual decision making on the purchases of goods. Those who provide for these wants, right, and free markets create them for a profit. So in the final analysis, the private individual decides what gets produced, when it gets produced, and for whom. Free market capitalism has been promoted by corporations and economic organizations operating at the global scale. So the production processes for a single corporation now occur in many countries as corporations are taking advantage of cheaper labor, land, and energy costs. These are, in economic terms, what we call factors of production. Financial and information services have seen expansion as a result of this at the global, at a global scale since the 1990s. Little note taking here, economic geography. A little white space there I see. Economic geography. We're talking about economic geography. This studies the impact of people and their decisions on the distribution of resource usage, the flows of capital and human production of material wealth and poverty. Page 54, I believe it is, page 54 in your textbook has a visual in connection with this. Yes, it's a inset map of where wealth is and where it isn't, right? An interesting inset map there that you can check out. So economic development, looking back at the lecture model here, economic development is commonly measured by an index I know you've heard of, the GDP, right? The gross domestic product. When we talk about GDP, we're talking about the total value of goods and services produced within a country in 1 year. And the GNI, the gross national income, which adds foreign transactions to the GDP. Now, they may not reflect comparable costs of living in a country. The purchasing power parity, the PPP, estimates, it's basically estimates of the GNI and the GDP, and might be a more accurate comparison of cost of living among countries, where it also measures exchange rates against the U.S. dollar. There's actually a website called, I think if you Google Big Mac Index, I know it's Big Mac. I think of the hamburger, right? Big Mac Index. So you Google Big Mac Index. You can do that, right? You can measure world exchange rates pegged to the United States dollar. And then you have your Human Poverty Index, or HPI, right? HPI, the Human Poverty Index, another type of index, which measures the needs of the poorest countries. It finds a balance between individual poverty and provision. A really cool chart that every chapter has in this textbook is Figure 2.27 over on page 55. It dated latter part of the 2000s, but it gives you kind of a caption or capsule look in each chapter of countries per 1,000 homes, per 1,000 people that own cars, right? Uh, Telephones, cell phones, um, laptops, computers, right? Running water, TVs, right? So you can, again, some of you I'm sure will find that very interesting in the chapters, and I'll alert you to them because I like these charts. I really do. I like these visuals. I'll alert you to them, I think, in every chapter. Tertiary production. Tertiary production. When we talk about tertiary production, this is basically service industries from government mandates through the manufacturing sector to provide health services, education. It includes private sector, initiated retail and wholesale trade, finance, legal, media, and information technology. Free market capitalism. Free market capitalism entails economic decision-making, capacities of individual purchases of goods. Advertisers create the wants with the goal to make profits, right? Competition ensues nationally and internationally. Theoretically, under that umbrella of free market capitalism, governments do regulate, or are some levels of regulation. They do regulate trade and fair business practices. You have lobbyists, right? Lobbyists influence lawmaking, right? And then you have taxes and tariffs too that are a reality. Central planning, on the other hand, is where central ministers do the planning. They decide on the economic questions of how much gets produced, when it gets produced, and for whom. These are in socialist forms of government and certainly communist forms of government. There's often a gap between the government elites and the general populace when it comes to standards of living in these types of countries. 1978, China began, and this happens, you're never going to find a country that's totally free market. You're never going to find a country that's totally communist, right? China, right? We know China has grafted in free market structures into their economy. That began in 1978. They began encouraging investment by private companies outside of China. They began encouraging uh, farmers to keep a small portion of their produce and they could sell it. This happens in other countries as well. India, they do that as well. Multinational corporations. Multinational corporations, they make goods or services for profits in several countries, but they're headquartered in one country, right? Coca-Cola is headquartered in Atlanta, and they're known all over the globe, right? All over the globe. I want to move now into cultural geography. It's the study of cultural geography is a study of spatial variations in um, cultural features, and it's an important contributor to our understanding of regional geography. To be quite candid about it, you have geographies of language, religion, race, class, and gender. I'm going to focus on here religion and class, but it helps us understand the similarities and differences of the traditions and behavioral practices that get passed down through the generation and transmitted across the Earth's surface. Uh, Similarities often stem from historical linkages to cultural hearths. We talk about cultural hearths, source areas where important cultural innovations originated and began dispersing. So, while distinct cultural fault lines or zones of contrasting cultural regions are an important part of the cultural landscape, there are subtle indicators of cultural globalization. Let's take a look at some of those. Universal or global religions. Universal or global religions can be joined by anyone. Christianity, Islam, right? Buddhism, three of the biggest. Uh, Class arises from stratification of society that imposed religious, economic, or some kind of social criteria. Wealth, education, birthright are common class distinctions around the globe as well. Then you have education and status of women. Education not only gives women confidence, but it enlightens them to opportunities and enhances decision making. And lastly, I want to hit the theme of economic geography and look at well, some of the living conditions, I guess. I'm trying to get the right way to say this from region to region. Some things I touched on at the top of this lecture. It's debatable. It's debatable, as I set this up, it's debatable how much humans have affected natural environments at the local scale through activities such as farming and deforestation. Since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in the 1830s in England, modern technology has brought improvements. It's brought improvements. Just take a look at cars today. With more cars on the road today than ever before, there's really less of a problem of CFCs in the atmosphere than there were 30, 40 years ago, right? Modern, we don't want to choke, right? We don't want to choke. So people find ways to get things cleaned up. So in light of that, because of clear cutting too with trees, because of clear cutting and techniques there and second growth trees, we actually have more forest today than we did in 1900. So perspective, the perspective of regional geography provides insight into how living conditions then vary from place to place, and that gets into how people use resources and the decisions they make, political and economic decisions. So a strong resource base can combine with strong leadership, honest leadership, historically has translated into positions of political and economic power and dominance. So while income poverty has been reduced in many parts of the globe over the past 50 years, many countries and regions continue to struggle with poverty. Numerous initiatives attempted to have introduced, trying to think of a way to say this here, ways to bolster standards of living, right? So with modernization, and they do this through modernization, being being chief among them, I would say. The 1990s, though, saw the introduction of what we call structural adjustment. Structural adjustment is implementing free market policies in return for international monetary, International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank loans as an alternative to modernization. I guess what I probably am saying there is that modernization is basically turned into, all right, I want you guys to modernize, we're going to give you loans. And, depending on what governments you're giving that money to, nothing much happens, in the said country because it's corrupt, right? It's corrupt. So structural adjustment has been a way to say, look, if we're going to get this money, we need to see certain things happening, right? And there's a concern, too, that recent gains in economic development in some of these economically marginalized places may be overwhelmed by forces of globalization. Let's break this down. Human development. Human development, this is a process of enhancing human capabilities and improving life quality through aspects as education, healthcare, access to adequate clean water and energy supplies. Sustainable human development is economic growth that does not damage resources for the future. If you're going to go in and you're going to cut down trees to build factories and places where you can create jobs, you got to be careful that you don't deplete the resources where they will not be able to make it back to the levels they were at when you started to make started to cut them down for progress. Now I see some notes here, and I want to talk here about in poor countries. In poor countries, few jobs are in a formal economy. And formal economy, we're talking about salaries that are taxed, and in these types of economies, few own land or homes. The majority of folks in the developing world live in what we call an informal economy. An informal economy, people gaining income as best as they can. They don't have really many property rights. Think of it this way: in somewhere like Calcutta, we'll take Calcutta for example. Calcutta, India. It's not uncommon And I'm not trying to be provocative here. It's not uncommon to find someone ravaging through a pile of debris or garbage to find wood and wood to make cabinets, right, for people to sell them. Well, there's no one monitoring that, right? So there's no salaries taken out. He's, you know, there are no taxes. So this is kind of a class example of what people do in informal economies. Now, structural adjustment. Structural adjustment is export based, and it limits bureaucracy and government involvement. So countries applying for aid should export manufactured goods and allow foreign investment, right? So it's like, if we're going to loan you cash, we're going to loan you cash, we need to have a benefit. We need to have a tangible benefit from this. So instead of just throwing out money, right? Human rights. Human rights emerged in part from revolutions in Europe and the United States that highlighted, liberty and equality. In France, it was during the French Revolution. Uh, Here in the United States, the American Revolution. Probably should have said the American Revolution first. The French Revolution was, on the idea of what happened here. But, the founding fathers were, paying close attention to things like the Bill of Rights, which was found again, copied, mimicked, influenced the Declaration of Human Rights and the Declaration of Rights of Men and Women in France during the French Revolution. Here's the thing, though: not all countries agree on human rights. The U.S.'s view on who sits on the United Nations Security Council versus the view of Russia or China, who sit on the Security Council. Russia or China do not mind the Iranians having a cyclical seat on the Security Council. There are a few countries that have a regular seat, the three that I mentioned, and then there's a kind of revolving door process with other countries that sit on it. During the Cold War between the Soviets and the U.S., political rhetoric reduced human rights to a propaganda weapon. The West focused on civil and political rights. The communists focused on social and economic rights. So that's chapter 2, and you can fill out your graphic organizers, and I'm going to expect you guys can get those back to me by 11:59 tonight. I will count that as a participation and an attendance grade, right, as well as a comprehension exercise. So today, kind of wrapping this up, we're looking at recognizing key components of population, and we're talking about demography, right? The age-sex diagrams, birth rates, infant mortality, the demographic transition model, migration. Thomas Malthus, right? Thomas Malthus, some of his predictions. And then we were looking at, we were asking, or one of the objectives was to discover elements of economic geography. Discover elements of economic geography. And there we're looking today at, some of the measurements to that, how you measure that, and tertiary production, right? Service industries, free market capitalism, the private sector determining what gets produced, for whom, how much, and when. Just reversed with central planning, socialist, communist governments. The government ministers decide those questions. We looked at some regional geography, right? Human development, sustainable development, structural adjustment, human rights, and your types of economies, formal and informal economies. And we were looking at the various, relating the various cultural practices that shape the world's cultural mosaic, right? Um, through trade and defense organizations, um, national government organizations, or non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations. We're looking at the difference between a nation and a country, and we talked about nationalism, right? The desire to have a self-governing country. We're looking at religion, right? Universal religions and class, right? Class or some kind of a structure, expected norm of behavior, a station of life, could be through education, birthright, economic status, education. So send in your a filled-in graphic organizer by 11:59 tonight. Keep one for yourself, of course, as they are great visual summaries. Now, when you guys are looking at this, it'll be a Monday, and so tomorrow, on Tuesday, I will have two short videos at the least that you can write on. I'll have you write on. One is on structural adjustment, the other is on birth rates, and I'm still in the process of getting you some kind of a short reading, which will serve as an FYI and break down some more of the overall concepts here. I also have in the news that is on the course page. I know one or two of you were gracious, but you had indicated you'd like to have more time, maybe to do the in the news since they're due on Thursdays. Um, that's fine if you can fit that in Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'm still going to have things for you to do on those days, but you can look at the options for in the news. I think there may be 10 for this week. Choose one of those, and by Thursday night, 11:59, you can get that to me. So again, if you guys have any questions, always feel free to email me. My phone number is there as well. I do have face-to-face classes during the week. I may not always be able to answer the phone calls during the day, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, I will talk to you next time. And in the meantime, you guys be tremendous, and I'll see you next time. Bye.